Hello there and welcome again to our program on business communications. And as I keep saying to you, business communications is a very vast subject. Today in our program, we're going to cover a part of communications that is really critical if you are a manager or an executive in business. And this is going to cover assertive communication. In this program, you will begin to understand more about the nature of communication and how being assertive is very, very important if you want to be a very effective communicator. So let's begin taking a look at the program objectives. You will understand a little bit about the philosophy of being assertive and what that actually means. Quite often you might hear this word, but do you actually understand the significance and the importance of it? You will be able to, by the end of this program, recognize the differences between assertive behavior and aggressive behavior, depending on what situations they are. And you will be able to recognize them very clearly and understand what each means. We do have some role plays involved for you to do by yourself with your colleagues perhaps, and you will be able to, through these role plays, start to act in an assertive way. By the end of this program too, hopefully you will be feeling encouraged to use assertive behavior. You will begin to understand just how important it is and how appropriate it is in terms of communicating with your team or with your boss or with your peers in your office. So let's take a look. I'm going to give you a challenge. I would like you to think for a moment and try to give a definition in one sentence if you can, not in a story, not in a whole page, but if you can just write one sentence as a definition of what assertiveness is. Try to think of it. What is a description of being assertive? You have indeed heard this expression or this description many, many times, but what actually does it mean? Have you got a definition, or are you a little bit unclear? If you can write it down, that would be very, very helpful. So begin to think now, what does assertiveness mean? I'm going to help you along the way. You may have been writing it and you're in the middle of writing it, so just try to complete that sentence as quickly as you can. There are many definitions of assertiveness, but actually they really come down to just a very simple explanation. We could say that assertiveness is an honest, direct, and appropriate expression of one's feelings, thoughts, and beliefs. Quite simply, that's what being assertiveness is all about. It means that you are standing up for what you actually feel and think about and believe in. And you're very honest about it. You're not going to hide anything. You're not going to elaborate unnecessarily on things. You're just communicating very honestly and openly about what you think and what you feel and what you believe. It might sound easy to be assertive. Do you think it's easy to be assertive? Sometimes it may not be easy to be assertive for various reasons. And sometimes we have within ourselves our own styles of behavior that we have had for many, many, many years, which has caused us perhaps not to be as assertive as we would like to be, depending on who we are with and the situation. So let's go further into assertiveness. Do a test for yourself. Can you express negative feelings about other people and their behaviors without using abusive language? This is a real test for you, isn't it? Can you do that? Can you say negative things about other people in a good way without being too derogatory or too abusive? Let's look at the next test. Are you able to exercise and express your strengths? Are you able to explain and to state the strengths that you have? Do you feel strong enough to say those things about yourself? Do you feel confident enough? Let's look at the next test. Can you easily recognize and compliment other people's achievements? Is it easy for you to be able to do that, or do you find that difficult? As we do this, think about yourself, all right? I say this time and again in our programs. You know you, so start to answer these things very openly and see how you go. Next, do you have the confidence to ask for something that is actually rightfully yours? Maybe you don't have it, and because you feel you should have it, do you have the confidence to ask for that? Let's look at the next test. Can you accept criticism without being defensive and coming out and getting all angry? Can you do that? Can you accept criticism in a positive way? Let's look at the next question. Do you feel comfortable accepting compliments? Or do you feel rather embarrassed and shy? How do you feel when someone pays you a compliment? What about the next question? Are you able to stand up for your rights? Do you feel strong enough to be able to say that something should happen because it's your right? Or do you shy away, do you run away, or do you close up and not say anything? What do you do in terms of that? Next one. Are you able to refuse unreasonable requests from friends, family, or co-workers? Are you able to do that? Or do you always follow and say, yes, I'll do it, even though you don't really want to do it? What about you? Are you able to refuse? Next one. Can you comfortably start and carry on a conversation with others? Or do you have to push yourself? Do you have to come out of your comfort zone and push yourself to be able to start to speak with other people? And finally, do you ask for assistance when you need it? Or do you just close up and continue on and not sort of want to bother anybody or trouble anybody? A yes response, by the way, to the questions that we've just gone through together indicates that this is an assertive response, an assertive approach. For example, in the last page here, the first one at the top, if you answered yes, you are able to refuse unreasonable questions from friends, then you are being assertive. You are standing up for what you feel you should do and what you feel is the right thing to do. If you say yes to the second question, can you comfortably start and carry on a conversation with others? Yes, I can. That means you have confidence and you have a good feel about yourself. You are quite direct and you are able to carry on. Number 3 here, just as examples. If you say yes to the third question, do you ask for assistance when you need it? Yes, I do. Means that you're not really afraid. You're quite willing to state the case and ask for assistance. It's not a problem for you. You feel that you can directly do that. So what we are seeing is a way for you to see whether you are an assertive person or whether you tend to be less assertive in some situations. You may be wondering why assertiveness is important. Well, in order to be effective in communicating with your staff or with anybody in your office or with anybody indeed, assertiveness brings about the achievement of an individual to reach shared goals. It's because you state the case, you get things moving. You're not afraid. You are willing to get things moving ahead. It's effective communicating. It's willingness to look at problems and concerns. If you are not assertive, you are going to run away from those problems and those concerns. Why is assertiveness important? Let's look at point 2. Assertiveness increases your ability to reach goals while you are keeping your rights and your dignity. You are keeping the good feeling you have about yourself and the strengths you feel about yourself and about who you are. So assertiveness is important. It's because you don't discount who you are. You're standing up for who you are, you're very happy with who you are, and you are communicating in order to get things done in a way that is pleasant for everybody concerned if possible. This is why assertiveness is really, really important. There are some myths about assertiveness. Some people tend to believe that if you are assertive, it brings about certain reactions. Some myths that we have are that other people's feelings and rights are more important than yours. That's wrong. Assertiveness does not mean that. Assertiveness is where your rights and your feelings are important, not thinking of other people all the time. It's where your rights are important to you. Some people think that you will offend other people by being assertive. Well, that depends, of course, on how you assert yourself. Some people believe that assertiveness means you're not important enough to express your feelings and rights. Well, that is really ridiculous. Assertiveness does not mean that. You are important to express your feelings and your rights. So let's look at it this way. You have the right to be assertive. This means you have the right to express yourself openly and honestly and directly while standing up for what you think is correct. You have that right. Each individual does. You also have the right in some ways to request that other people change their behaviour if they are actually, we say, infringing on or imposing on your particular rights. That means that you as an individual have certain abilities and rights that should be respected by others, and we respect the rights of others as well. So if something is happening, for example, a good example here would be in a smoking situation. If you're in a room where there is a no smoking ban in place, and for example, somebody who's sitting there in the room as well also lights up a cigarette and ignores the signs on the wall, you have a right to request that they stop smoking because they are infringing on your right. So in this instance, you would be assertive. That's just a simple example for you. It doesn't mean you have to stand up and state your case and be very direct and too forceful when you're asserting yourself. That's not what we're saying. There are ways to be assertive, and we're going to go through that together. So you also have the right to use your own time to answer questions. For example, if you're not ready to answer something straight at the minute that it is asked, you do have a right to say, look, do you mind if I come back to you in a few minutes or in half an hour? Or do you mind if I see you about it tomorrow when we can talk more comfortably and I've got some more information? You do have that right to use your own time to answer questions. Sometimes it may not be possible depending on the situation, so let's not get a bit taken away by this. But basically you do have the right to say that. And you do have the right to express your needs, even if they might be a little bit illogical, even if somebody else might think they're a little bit stupid or crazy or out of turn. You do have the right to express yourself. But be aware that there are responsibilities attached to all these rights. So what I'm saying here is, basically, we do have the right to be strong and to be able to stand up and express what we feel. We do have that right as human beings and as individuals. I think it's important to remember this point. also other points that are well worth remembering when we talk about assertive communication is you don't live in isolation. You are on this planet with billions of other people, and so therefore we all have to be able to communicate effectively. We all are individuals, and we need to recognize that and respect that. Also, having said that, your actions impact everybody around you. You're not alone in the world. You're not standing or sitting or lying in a hammock on a deserted island. You are living with a lot of people around you, and so what you do impacts everybody. So you are an important part of your environment. Also, remember too, that you are in control most of the time. You are in control of your behavior. And assertiveness is a behavior that you are in control of. And finally, your response to any situation that arises, must be guided by ascertaining your rights and responsibilities and following through. So you will respond to situations according to what you feel you should do, what you feel is right, and what you feel you believe in, and what you feel is a good thing. Quite often we forget these things. You know, we do tend to think about other people all the time, and we don't really take the time to consider ourselves. We are important in a very good sense. I don't want you to get carried away and have feelings of superiority when I say that. What you need to do is to start to recognize that you are a valuable person. You are important to what is going on around you. So being assertive is a very important behavior that we do need to possess to be very effective as individuals and as managers. So right now you might be starting to understand whether you are assertive or not. Is that right? How are you doing? Do you think you are assertive? Perhaps maybe a little bit, a lot. Perhaps you could be more assertive. Start to think of yourself as we go through this program. So if you are tending not to be so assertive, what is it that is keeping you from being assertive? It could be that you might be afraid of change. You might be afraid of things that are different, and so therefore you shy away from those changes and you tend to become very quiet and subdued and withdrawn. It could be that you think that other people, in responding to your assertiveness, may have to become rather submissive, and so therefore you refuse to admit that that's going to happen, and you don't really want to see that happen, so therefore you don't really want to express yourself in a rather assertive manner. You might think that people might not like that and they'll be more submissive rather than responding normally. It could be that you have a fear of ruining relationships that you have if you speak your mind. If you stand up and say exactly what you think, perhaps you're afraid that people might not like you afterwards, or they may think differently of you and that may not want to be around you. It could hurt your relationships. Or it could be that you are not assertive because you lack confidence in your ability. You don't feel that you have strengths, that your strengths are not good enough, or that you are weak in some part, and you lack confidence in your ability to do things. When you have these fears, let's say, then that certainly, or those certainly are going to keep you from being as assertive as you may wish to be. Let me ask you a few things. Have you ever felt guilty about saying no? Have you ever felt that others regard you as a pushover? Meaning, do others think that you're easy to be able to convince or easy to be able to get around and ask things of? Have you ever felt that it's better to be well liked than well respected? That's an interesting one. Well liked more so than being well respected. Have you ever felt that outbursts of anger are appropriate? Maybe you don't think anger should be anywhere, and therefore you shy away from it, and maybe that's why you don't want to be assertive, because people may get angry. And have you ever felt that intimidation is the only way you can get what you want? Think about these feeling questions. You'll start to learn more about yourself when you start to answer these questions one by one. If any of the answers to those questions, by the way, sound like you, it means that you are probably non-assertive. You are probably exhibiting a behavior which shows a lack of confidence and lack of being able to stand up for who you are. Realize that actually in this kind of situation, you are not alone. There are indeed many, many people, and there will be many people in your workplace too, who are not as assertive as they wish they could be. Whilst assertiveness is very important in enhancing our workplace, enhancing our lives, and enhancing teamwork and interpersonal relationships, etc., sometimes assertiveness is not always appropriate. How can you tell? The answer is to tailor your response to the situation. Situations always help us know how we should behave. Situations always are a great indicator as to what kind of behavior we need to express and to what degree we need to express it. So a word of caution here. Always let the situation give you some background as to whether you need to be assertive and how assertive you should be. A way you can check this is ask yourself, when you are in certain situations, how important is being assertive in this particular situation? What will you think of yourself if you are not assertive now? What are the consequences of assertive behavior? If I do it now, what will be the consequences? And do the costs of this behavior outweigh the benefits? Meaning, if I do become assertive, will what happens because of it outweigh the benefits of not being assertive? Always self-check. Remember, we did talk in the past about emotional intelligence and being self-aware, knowing what triggers emotions and responses and impulses in you. Well, when you're trying to understand your behavior and you're trying to improve your assertive communication, then you do need to delve deeply into who you are. So asking yourself these questions is a very good way of starting to really get to know who you are. These are very wise words indeed, and wise questions. I'm going to help you along now by really starting to focus on what assertiveness is. Quite simply, we can tick these boxes off as we go through them. And down below here in the slide, you see we have a thumbs up diagram, meaning that this is what it's all about. Assertiveness is respect for yourself and for others. That's not too bad, is it? Having respect for yourself is good. Of course, having respect for others is as well. But don't forget, you also need to have respect for yourself. The next tick in the box is assertiveness is honestly expressing your thoughts, your feelings and beliefs. You cannot lie and be assertive. You cannot be shady about what you're thinking or feeling and be assertive. You have to be totally honest. That makes sense. Otherwise, you have a very deep internal conflict with yourself. And box number 3 with a tick in it, assertiveness is effectively influencing, listening, and negotiating with others. And this means communicating. Communicating in all the ways that we've gone through in this communication program. But communicating effectively with others. Let's take a quick look now to focus on and reinforce what assertiveness is not. Okay? And here the key word is not. So assertiveness is definitely not these things. It is important to remember that assertiveness is not aggressiveness or selfishness. Aggression we are going to look at a little bit further on. So assertiveness is very different to the behavior we call being aggressive. And assertiveness definitely is not being selfish. Being assertive does not involve humiliating or abusing other people and their rights. It does not mean that you can have fun unnecessarily or in a hurting way and humiliate other people in a bad sense or abuse them and their rights. That is what assertiveness definitely is not. And also, being assertive does not mean violating the rights of others or gaining at the expense of someone else's loss. So here you can see, assertiveness actually is a very positive thing. Assertiveness is a very good behavior to embrace. It's a good behavior to nurture, to develop, and to use potentially every day in your life. So here we see a thumbs down symbol for what assertiveness is not about. So I'd like you to start to really focus in your mind and remember these points about what assertiveness is and definitely what assertiveness is not. Aggressiveness. Being aggressive. This is what assertiveness is not. And I'm going to explain a little bit about being aggressive to you here now. Aggressiveness is inappropriately expressing yourself, your feelings, your beliefs, in a way that violates other people's rights. It means that you might get angry, you might get too forceful, you might get too pushy, you might get too hard and sharp and sarcastic and critical in an extreme sense. And when you do that, you put people down. You look at them, you regard them in a very, very poor way. You hurt them, in other words. Being aggressive means that you achieve your goal by not allowing others the freedom to choose. Being aggressive means you push, you don't listen to other people, you just want to achieve things the way you want to do it. You don't really want to listen to others. This is being aggressive as well. That comes into that behavior. And being aggressive means you completely disrespect other people. You really don't care about them. Whether you are doing it actively or whether you are just looking at them in a way that is putting somebody down or in a very condescending, superior kind of way. Even your looks, even the way you regard somebody with your body language or the way you move something on a table, sometimes that can reflect your aggressive behavior. If you push a chair under a table, for example, rather than place it gently under a table, that is aggressive behavior as opposed to just normal, maybe assertive behavior. And people pick up on this. People see it. So aggressiveness comes out in very dramatic ways, and it affects the other people very, very badly. It violates their rights and violates actually who they are. I'm pretty sure you can understand the difference between being assertive and being aggressive. Are you aggressive? Take a look at yourself. We've asked you whether you are assertive, and we've asked you so far to look at questions and consider how you would respond, yes or no, to those questions. So now we're going to look at the behavior of being aggressive. So let's take a look at these questions. Do you become abusive? Meaning, do you insult? Do you insult other people? Either verbally, with your words, or physically, when criticizing others? So think about that. Do you purposely make other people feel like they are stupid or they are incompetent and unimportant? Do you purposely do that? Do you like doing that? Do you try to do that? And next question, do you make unreasonable demands of other people? Do you make people do things that are very, very difficult and you know they really can't complete them, but you still do it anyway? If you answer yes to any of these questions, it may indicate that you have a certain aggressiveness in your behaviour. We can see by the look of the angry dog on the side here in this slide. Maybe that's you. Are you aggressive? Let's continue on so you can find out more. Do you brag or exaggerate your achievements? Do you talk a lot about yourself? Do you ignore the rights and feelings of other people? Do you care about others and what happens to them? Next question. Do you aim to get your way at all costs? Is it important that you get your way regardless of what other people do or what is around or whether somebody has to suffer? Do you always want to get your way all the time? And finally, do you often dominate conversations with others? Do you always want to hear your voice? Do you let other people speak or do you override their speech or speak loudly so your voice is heard much more than others? As we said, if you answer yes to any of these questions, it could be that you have a tendency to behave in an aggressive way. Sometimes we need to be a little bit aggressive. It depends on the situation, as do many behaviours. However, if predominantly you behave aggressively, then this is a time when you need to sit back and start to take a look at your behaviour. Let's take a look at what acting unassertively is. We know how to act assertively. Now let's look at, as we have just done, how to be aggressive or what aggressiveness is. And now we look at what unassertive actions mean. Unassertiveness is acting in an indirect or passive manner as well. It can also be acting in an aggressive way, but also acting in a very passive way, as where you are so quiet, so withdrawn, that you don't really say very much at all, that you don't really stand up for what you believe in. Active unassertively is also permitting others to take advantage of you. If you let other people, we say, walk all over you, if you let other people do all the talking, then you are acting unassertively. Your rights are not being considered, and they are taking the superior role. So that is being unassertive behaviour on your part. Acting unassertively is also thinking that you and your needs are inferior to others and their needs. Be careful here. If you have low self-esteem, if you feel that you are not important and that your rights, well, they can wait. Other people are more important than me. I'm just a little person. I'm just a tiny person in this great big world of people. If you think that, then you are really thinking and acting unassertively. So, are you unassertive? Let's take a look at these questions. Do you feel guilty standing up for your rights or expressing your feelings? Do you feel guilty when you do that? Are you unable to recognize and acknowledge your strengths? Is it hard for you to know what you're good at? Are you uncomfortable with starting or carrying on a conversation? And do you rarely stand up for yourself? Is that something that is a rare thing to see? Are you always sort of seeking to be very quiet and not stand up for who you are? Do you have trouble saying no to people? Next question. Are you unable to ask other people to perform reasonable requests? And finally, do you feel that you let other people take advantage of you? As we have touched on these questions before in the opening of this program, if a yes answer comes to any of the questions, it may indicate that you are unassertive. Here we can see, in this slide, a little mouse down at the bottom of the page. We can sometimes say that mice tend to be rather timid in their behaviour. Normally that's what we associate the image of a mouse with. Being very timid, very shy, running away quickly, not wanting to be out in the open, probably because they feel they're going to get eaten. But we are using the picture of a mouse to be a symbol in some ways of being unassertive, and that sort of symbolises the unassertive behaviour. So we come to the question, or not the question, but the statement, assertiveness versus authority. Sometimes people feel that if you are assertive, it means that you're pulling rank. That means that you're playing the boss too much. You're starting to be too authoritative in the way that you're behaving. But if you use effective communication skills, assertiveness and self-confidence, for example, which are effective communication skills, then most situations may be resolved. But if you start to use your authority, your position, so to speak, then using your authority is legitimate, but as a secondary option. It is always best, in other words, to use your behaviours and your skills first, rather than saying, well, I'm the boss and this is how it's going to be done. I would think that it's better to use your position and your authority as a second backup to the first important effective communication skills. You will earn far greater respect when you do that. You may see here that be careful, don't use these cautions as an excuse to perpetuate unassertive behaviour. Be careful how you use your authority, how you use your position. And more often than not, assertiveness is appropriate to the situation and you should not hesitate in applying it. Assertiveness always will come out as being the best way to handle a situation. You will find that. So in the majority of situations that happen, if you want to know what to do, then just follow guidelines to being assertive. That is a safe way, that is perhaps the most appropriate way to handle situations. What would you say in these situations? Here we have 4 scenarios, and I'd like you to go through them with me and start to think, what would you say about the behaviours and how the reactions are in these situations? First one. Joan is at a meeting where the topic of the meeting is the profitability of the project she's been working on for 3 months straight. She hasn't said a word in the past hour in this meeting. Suddenly, she jumps up and accuses the boss of deliberately cancelling the project based on personal dislike. What do you think about her behaviour? What would you say about her reaction in this situation? Let's take a look at the next scenario. What would you say about the behaviour here? The copier, the photocopier, has been broken for 2 days. Sam has asked the secretary to call in for repairs several times with no effect. He says nothing and ends up calling in the repairman himself. After all, he thinks his secretary has been too busy, probably, typing up the memo he gave her this morning. Now, what do you think about his behaviour? Is it appropriate? Would you do the same thing? How would you behave? And how would you react to that situation? Let's take a look at the next scenario. What would you say to this situation? Bob is in line at the deli counter waiting to be served. Maybe he's wanting his lunch. His number is about to be called next, as they do. They have a queuing system with numbers, and suddenly a woman steps in front of him and places her order. She barges in front of him. Bob complains very loudly about the deli worker and the woman who jumped in front of him. He says he will never shop there again, throws his ticket away and stalks off. Well, what do you say about that behaviour? What do you think about that reaction? Is it the appropriate one to take? How would you react in the same situation? And finally, scenario number 4. What would you say? Judy's boss asks her to go on an important business trip which will carry over into the weekend. And on the weekend, it's her sister's wedding. Judy feels she can't refuse her boss, and she plans on sending her husband to the wedding in her place. What do you think about that behaviour? Is it appropriate? Is that response appropriate, to send your husband in your place and go on the business trip? How would you behave in such a situation? And finally, we have a 5th one. George is next in line to buy tickets in a crowded movie theatre. Just as his turn comes up, a man cuts in front of him and requests tickets. George meekly steps back, quietly steps back, and allows the man room and hopes he gets waited on next. George hopes that his turn will come up next, but he quietly stepped back to let this person in. How would you behave in that situation? What would you say? What would you say to that man in this situation, as indeed in all of those other situations? What would you say? Did you think that these were appropriate and effective ways to handle the situations? As I asked you when we went through them one by one, did you think that? The answer is probably no. Reactions like these usually cause more problems than they solve. Reactions, for example, George in the last scenario, stepping back meekly and not saying anything to somebody who pushed in front of him, these sorts of situations and reactions cause more problems than they solve. George will always do that for the rest of his life, probably, let people push in front of him. What do you think he should have said? George probably should have said, "Excuse me, would you mind stepping to the back of the line? I'm next before you are. Thank you very much." Maybe George should have said that. So these situations may appear in your life at different times, or similar situations like them. So what do you say? What kind of behaviour do you have? Are you assertive? Are you aggressive? Are you passive? Passive people usually speak softly and they hesitate sometimes. Passive people, and maybe this is you, I'm not too sure, passive people use fillers. We say like and as they speak, they punctuate their conversation with these fillers, which indicates hesitance on their part. For most of the time, it indicates that. Passive people also tend to be people who avoid eye contact with others. They don't really engage the other person with strong eye contact. And passive people usually allow other people in their personal space, meaning that they let people get perhaps a little bit too physically close to them when they really shouldn't. And people invade their personal space and they don't really say anything about that. They're too afraid to. They're too scared perhaps of what the reaction of the other person might be. They're not strong enough to say, "Hey, would you mind not getting too close? Do you mind?" So that explains a little bit about passive behaviour. So you may see the passive behaviour in the reaction that George had when he was in the queue, the last scenario we went through. You may see aggressive behaviour also in some of those scenarios, we haven't really seen very good assertive behavior. So when it comes to situations, how do you know whether you should use force or not? How do you know whether you should be aggressive or not, or assertive or not? Let's take a look at that particular point. Passiveness is clearly not conducive to ascertaining your personal rights. If you are passive, then you can't really stand up for who you are. You're too soft, too withdrawn. But you don't need to go to the other extreme as well to be assertive. You don't need to be forceful to be assertive. So what I'm saying here is being passive means you can't possibly be assertive. If you're too aggressive and forceful, you're not being assertive either. Soft-spoken people can't be assertive too. Imagine if you're so softly spoken. How do you confidently say what you want to say? No one will believe you. Here I'm just exaggerating the point to give you a demonstration. If you are too soft, then that kind of behavior doesn't match being assertive. There's no one particular way to be assertive correctly, but there are things that you can avoid. Let's just take a little bit of a closer look at being aggressive. We know what passive is. Now let's take a closer look. Aggressive people raise their voices quite a lot. They speak in a very loud way when they lose control, and you can see that coming. Sometimes you can see it building up and you know, whoa, that person's going to blow their stack and be really aggressive because their voice is getting louder and louder and louder as it is as I'm speaking to you. Aggressive people shout and they sometimes use insults and they say you should and you must. They use these kinds of words very forcefully when they are speaking and shouting. As I said, aggressive behavior also. People use their eyes in different ways where they stare down at people. And they sometimes get a little bit close. They really get close to you. And too close for comfort, we say, where you feel that your rights are being infringed upon, where the space between you physically and the other person is quite dangerous and very, very uncomfortable. An assertive person, let's take a look at how an assertive person expresses themselves. An assertive person, as we say, asserts his rights in a positive, open, honest and self-confident manner. When we looked at the definition of being assertive, this is what we came up with. So assertive people usually speak calmly and confidently. They notify other people of their feelings with statements like, I think that, and I feel that. Not, you should, you must, as in contrast to our aggressive friends who behave very poorly. And assertive people usually maintain good eye contact. They have good posture and they stand in a very positive way and they have a certain level of control about themselves. Control with their voice, their body language and just the way they behave. So here we can see the differences that now are emerging between passive, aggressive and assertive behavior. We can see the different kinds of communication styles that begin and come with passive, aggressive and assertive people. And you may start to see yourself as either passive, aggressive or assertive in the way you behave and the way you communicate. And I do feel that you are now starting to understand what assertive communication is all about. And in some ways, actually, how much better it is than the other two kinds of communication. Do you agree with me on that? I'm sure you do. Assertive behavior, in most instances, is the far more preferable way to behave, and assertive communication also is the best way to communicate. So there are several tips, just a few tips I will like to pass on to you about being assertive. If you want to be assertive, be aware of your expression. Know that your expression on your face, what people see, what other people see, is instantly absorbed, instantly noticed. And therefore, people will act and think about you, and sometimes they will judge you because of what you look like, the expression you are carrying around with you on your face. Something that will help you in trying to be assertive is do not act hastily or in anger. Do not be angry. Do not be quick to become angry. Remain calm and cool and courteous and collected. Collected meaning aware of your thoughts and aware of who you are and what you're doing. And we say avoid making mountains out of molehills. This means avoid making something that is rather a minor thing into something that is a major thing. That doesn't really have to be built up that way. Sometimes things are not as bad as they seem. Don't exaggerate the small things. Don't make something that is a small problem a huge problem when it really is only a small problem. If you can follow these simple suggestions, you will present yourself as someone who is confident and someone who is quite optimistic, as opposed to somebody who comes across as being very hostile, very angry, very aggressive and ready to fight, and rather ready to sort of upset other people. Do you know the main aim of assertive behavior is certainly to make sure that the outcome of your behavior makes everybody feel okay, makes everybody feel good. In situations, you want to ensure that each person at the end of the discussion or the conversation through your assertive communication feels good about the outcome. Everybody may disagree on things, but at least they come away feeling that they have been valued, that they haven't been discounted or been looked down upon, that whatever discussions you've had have been fair and balanced and reasonable. So assertiveness. Are you assertive? Can you express yourself assertively? These are important things now that you need to understand, and through the questions that we've asked in this particular session of our assertive communication program, I do hope that you are starting to understand more about who you are. This is the key. Remember, you are the key to a whole lot of things that go on around you. You make the choices of what happens. You are the one that causes the effect. So it's very, very important indeed that you recognize your behavior. Are you passive? Are you aggressive? Are you assertive? To what degree are you passive? It could be that you are passive 10%, 20% of the time, 10%, 20% in some situations. It could be that you are aggressive perhaps only when you really have to fight for something. That in some ways is a natural thing. If we have something that's happening to us that's very dangerous, if there's an emergency that comes up, then perhaps we might have to be aggressive to fight for our survival. That is normal. That kind of aggression we do understand. But in the business sense, aggression or aggressiveness needs to be closely looked at and closely monitored. And finally, are you assertive? Do you recognize that some part of you is assertive? Are you assertive in some situations only? You are the one who knows that more than I. I'm trying to help you draw it out and know better how you can improve to become more assertive. Thank you for listening to this segment, And I look forward to seeing you in our next session, in the continuing part of this, where we start to look at behaviours a little bit more deeply and ways that you can improve upon your assertive skills. Thank you and goodbye.